A quiet suburban street in Hudson, Ohio, bathed in the soft glow of early morning light. Inside a modest home on West Streetsboro Street, a 41-year-old father of two, Dr. Todd Morgan, lies on the floor, his life draining away from 7 gunshot wounds. His 4-year-old daughter waits at school, wondering why her dad never showed up to pick her up. His phone, now missing, holds secrets that might have saved him. Hours earlier, a 911 call, accidental, fleeting, rang out from the killers. Phone. The police called back, left a voicemail, and did nothing more. No patrol car, no follow-up, just a message lost in the void. Todd Morgan asked for help in his own way, through the life he lived and the connections he made. The system ignored him. Now, he's dead. This isn't just a story of a murder. It's a story of a system that failed a man who deserved better. A system that saw the warning signs, heard the cries, and turned away. This is the story of Todd Morgan, a Cleveland State University professor, a devoted father, and a man whose death could have been prevented if anyone had cared enough to act. But more than that, this is the story of how we've built a society where cries for help echo in empty chambers, where technology designed to protect us becomes a tool for predators, and where the very institutions we trust with our lives prioritize convenience over human dignity. Todd Morgan's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a systemic execution carried out not by a single killer, but by a network of failures so profound, so inexcusable, that they demand we ask Todd Morgan wasn't a man who lived on the edge. A respected assistant professor of business at Cleveland State University, he was known for his quiet demeanor, his love for his 2 young children, and his dedication to his work. His home, nestled in a peaceful Hudson neighborhood, had a private pond and a small greenhouse, a sanctuary for a man who kept to himself but poured his heart into everything he touched. All who knew Todd Morgan could attest to his fierce love of his family, his obituary read, but those words, touching as they are, hide the fuller picture of a man navigating the complexities of modern life. As a single father, he juggled the demands of academia and parenting with the quiet grace of someone who understood that his children depended on him for everything: stability, love, and safety. His colleagues at Cleveland State University remember him as intellectually curious but personally reserved. He wasn't the type to broadcast his personal struggles or seek attention for his challenges. When Todd decided to explore online dating in early 2023, it was a quiet decision made by a man hoping to find companionship in a world that increasingly demanded digital connections. That decision would kill him. In the weeks leading up to April 19, 2023, Todd had been communicating with Terayona Pascal, a 31-year-old Cleveland woman whose online persona masked a dangerous reality. Their connection was forged through a dating app. The exact platform remains unnamed in official reports, a telling omission that speaks to corporate liability and institutional protection of profit over people. But here's what we do know. Pascal wasn't a random encounter. Her digital footprint, later examined by investigators, revealed patterns that should have raised red flags long before she ever met Todd. Her social media accounts contained images that would later prove crucial to the case, including a photo of her with a mild cigar burning in an ashtray, eerily similar to the 2 burned cigars found at Todd's murder scene. Think about that for a moment. The evidence of her connection to the crime scene was literally posted on her social media profile, visible to anyone who cared to look. But no one was looking. No algorithm flagged the pattern. No safety protocol caught the connection. The digital breadcrumbs that could have saved Todd's life were scattered across the internet, ignored by the very systems designed to protect users. Investigative files later revealed that Todd and Pascal had been communicating for only a short time before their fatal meeting. Their conversation history, buried in the dating app servers, remained unexamined until after Todd was dead. What did they talk about? What warnings might those messages have contained? What red flags were ignored not just by Todd, but by the platform that facilitated their connection? We'll never know because the app's safety protocols failed, because digital platforms prioritize engagement over safety, because Todd Morgan's life was worth less than user retention metrics and advertising revenue. April 19th, 2023 started like any other day in Hudson, Ohio. The sun rose over quiet suburban streets. Children prepared for school. Todd Morgan got ready for what he thought would be a normal day, perhaps tinged with the nervous excitement of meeting someone new. At approximately 10:30 a.m., neighbors later reported they saw a woman with long dark hair arriving at Todd's home on West Streetsboro Street. She carried a box, contents unknown, purpose unclear. Ring camera footage, that modern savior of suburban security, captured her car pulling into the driveway. The timestamp would later become crucial evidence, but in the moment it was just another delivery, another visitor, another ordinary moment in an ordinary neighborhood. But nothing about this visit was ordinary. Ring cameras don't just record, they're designed to alert homeowners and, theoretically, provide real-time security. But security for whom? The footage that could have saved Todd's life sat in digital storage, unmonitored, unanalyzed, waiting for investigators who would only arrive after it was too late. Inside the house, we can only imagine what happened next. The conversations, the escalation, the moment when companionship turned to violence. But we know how it ended. Todd Morgan shot 7 times, his life bleeding out onto the floor of his own home, while his killer methodically covered her tracks. At approximately 11:15 a.m., around the time forensic experts believed Todd was dying, a 911 hang-up call was placed from Terriona Pascal's cell phone. It was a fleeting signal, a digital cry that pierced through the ordinary noise of emergency dispatch systems. For exactly 3.7 seconds, a connection existed between a murder scene and the people paid to respond to emergencies. 3.7 seconds. That's how long Todd Morgan's last hope for survival lasted. The Hudson Police Department's dispatcher, following standard protocol, called back within 6 minutes. The phone went to voicemail. The dispatcher left a message. "Hello, this is the Hudson Police Department. Your cell phone just called 911, calling to make sure there's no problems. Please call us back at 330-342-1800. Thank you." Professional, polite, utterly useless. No one returned the call. No officer was dispatched. No patrol car rolled down West Streetsboro Street to investigate. The 911 system, that final safety net, we're told will always be there when we need it most, failed Todd Morgan when he needed it most. But why? Hudson Police Chief Perry Tabak would later defend his department's inaction, calling the incident isolated and insisting that protocols were followed. But what kind of protocol allows a 911 hang-up call in a quiet suburban neighborhood to go uninvestigated? What kind of system prioritizes paperwork over human life? In major cities, 911 hang-up calls might be dismissed due to volume and resource constraints. But Hudson, Ohio, isn't Chicago or New York. It's a small, affluent community where violent crime is rare and police resources aren't stretched thin. On April 19, 2023, the Hudson Police Department had the time, the resources, and the responsibility to investigate that call. They chose not to. While Todd Morgan bled to death in his Hudson home, Terriona Pascal was already executing a cover-up that revealed both her calculating nature and the system's complete blindness to digital warning signs. Phone records later analyzed by investigators painted a chilling picture of the hours following Todd's murder. Pascal's cell phone, the same device that had accidentally dialed 911, began pinging cell towers along a route from Hudson to Macedonia, Ohio. At 12:43 p.m., less than 2 hours after the murder, Her phone's GPS recorded her stopping along a highway in Macedonia, the exact location where Todd's missing phone would later be found, but that's not all. In the days following the murder, as Todd's family frantically searched for answers and police slowly began their investigation, Pascal was conducting her own digital surveillance operation. Her browsing history, later subpoenaed, revealed daily searches of Fox 8 News, Cleveland.com, and other local media outlets for updates on the case. She was monitoring the investigation, tracking the police response, staying one step ahead of law enforcement by using the very news sources that were supposed to inform the public about the danger in their midst. Think about the audacity of that behavior. While Todd's mother, Sandy, was planning her son's funeral, while his children were asking when Daddy was coming home, while his colleagues were grappling with the loss of a respected friend, his killer was reading about their grief online, perhaps even enjoying the coverage of her crime. But here's the truly maddening part. All of this digital activity was happening in real time, creating a trail of evidence that could have led police directly to Pascal within hours of the murder. Her phone's location data, her internet search history, her social media activity. It was all there, waiting to be analyzed by investigators who possessed the tools and technology to track digital footprints with surgical precision. They just weren't looking. The gunshots that killed Todd Morgan weren't silent. In a quiet Hudson neighborhood where the loudest sounds are usually lawnmowers and children playing, 7 gunshots should have been impossible to ignore. Several neighbors later told police they heard what sounded like firecrackers or construction noise around 11 a.m. on April 19th. Others reported seeing the woman with dark hair leaving Todd's house, walking quickly to her car with what appeared to be urgency. Ring cameras from multiple houses captured footage of her departure, showing her carrying items from the house, likely including Todd's phone. But no one called police. No one thought those firecrackers might be something more sinister. No one found it suspicious that a visitor was leaving a house so quickly, carrying items that didn't belong to her. No one connected the dots between unusual sounds and unusual behavior in a neighborhood where unusual anything should have raised immediate concerns. This isn't entirely the community's fault. We live in a society that has trained us to mind our own business, to avoid getting involved, to assume someone else will handle problems that don't directly affect us. But the result of that conditioning is that Todd Morgan died alone, surrounded by people who could have saved him if they just made a phone call. The technological infrastructure was there. Ring cameras recorded everything. Cell phones were within reach. The Hudson Police Department was minutes away. But the human infrastructure, the willingness to act when something feels wrong, had been eroded by decades of social conditioning that prioritizes convenience over community, privacy over protection. Todd Morgan was supposed to pick up his 4-year-old daughter from school at 3:00 p.m. on April 19, 2023. It was a routine he followed religiously, one of those parental responsibilities that defined his daily schedule and demonstrated his commitment to his children. When 3:00 p.m. came and went with no sign of Todd, school officials began making calls. First to his cell phone, which went directly to voicemail because it was sitting in a ditch in Macedonia, discarded by his killer. Then to emergency contacts, family members, anyone who might know where Todd Morgan was. By 4:00 p.m., concern was turning to alarm. Todd wasn't the type of parent to simply not show up. He wasn't forgetful or unreliable. If he said he'd be there at 3:00 p.m., he'd be there at 2:55 p.m. The school's persistence in trying to locate Todd likely saved his daughter from hours of confusion and fear, but it also highlighted another systemic failure. Why did it take a missed school pickup to trigger a welfare check? Why wasn't the 911 hang-up call from earlier that day enough to prompt police action? At 7:20 p.m., more than 8 hours after Todd was murdered, Hudson police finally conducted A welfare check at his West Streetsboro Street home. They found the front door unlocked. Inside, they discovered Todd's body on the floor, shot in the head and torso, his blood pooled around him in a scene that would haunt investigators for months. The Summit County Medical Examiner's Office ruled his death a homicide caused by multiple gunshot wounds. But Todd Morgan had been dead for hours by then. His killer was long gone, his phone was discarded, and the digital trail that could have led police to her immediately was growing colder by the minute. The Hudson Police Department's handling of Todd Morgan's case reveals failures so fundamental that they call into question the basic competence of modern law enforcement. This isn't about individual officer mistakes or split-second decisions under pressure. This is about institutional protocols that prioritize bureaucratic convenience over human life. Let's examine the facts. The 911 hang-up call at 11:15 a.m. on April 19th, a 911 call was placed from Teriana Pashal's phone and immediately disconnected. Standard protocol required a callback, which dispatcher made 6 minutes later. When the call went to voicemail, protocol required leaving a message and doing nothing else. But what if the protocol is wrong? In a small town like Hudson, where violent crime is rare and police resources aren't stretched thin, a mysterious 911 hang-up should trigger immediate investigation. The caller's location was known through cell tower triangulation. The address wasn't in a high-crime area where hang-up calls might be common. The time of day, late morning, wasn't consistent with typical false alarms or pocket dials. Every piece of available information suggested this call deserved immediate attention. Instead, it received a voicemail and a note in a logbook. When Todd failed to pick up his daughter from school, concerned family members contacted police multiple times between 4 p.m. and 7 p.m. Each call was logged, each concern was noted, but no action was taken until 7:20 p.m., more than 3 hours after the first report. Why the delay? Hudson Police Chief Perry Tabak's department has never provided a satisfactory explanation. They cite standard procedures and appropriate protocols, but what procedure justifies leaving a 4-year-old child wondering where her father is while police take their time responding to a welfare check? When officers finally arrived at Todd's home and discovered his body, the crime scene had been compromised for nearly 9 hours. Evidence had degraded, digital trails had grown cold, and the killer had vanished into the night. The delayed response didn't just fail Todd, it handicapped the entire investigation that followed. But perhaps most damning of all is Chief Tabak's public response to criticism of his department's handling of the case. Rather than acknowledging failures and implementing reforms, he doubled down on department protocol and called Todd's murder an isolated incident. Isolated from what? Competent policing? Public accountability? Basic human decency? The Todd Morgan case exposes the massive gap between the technological capabilities available to law enforcement and their actual utilization of those tools. We live in an age where digital forensics can reconstruct crimes with microscopic precision, where cell phone data can track suspects in real time, where social media analysis can predict behavior patterns with startling accuracy. None of these tools helped Todd Morgan. Teriana Pashal's cell phone was pinging cell towers throughout the day of the murder, creating a detailed map of her movements from Hudson to Macedonia and back to Cleveland. This data was available to law enforcement in real time through emergency protocols and cellular provider cooperation. But no one was monitoring it. No one thought to track the phone that had called 911 and failed to respond to callbacks. The technology existed to locate Pascal within hours of the murder. It simply wasn't used. Pashal's social media accounts contained crucial evidence linking her to the crime scene, including photos that matched physical evidence found at Todd's home. Her post-murder browsing history showed her actively monitoring news coverage of the investigation. This digital behavior created a pattern that could have been detected by automated monitoring systems or social media intelligence platforms used by law enforcement agencies nationwide. But Hudson police weren't looking at her social media until after she was arrested, nearly 3 weeks after Todd's murder. The dating app where Todd met his killer remains unnamed in official reports, but its role in facilitating this tragedy cannot be ignored. Modern dating platforms have access to sophisticated algorithms that can identify potentially dangerous users, flag suspicious behavior patterns, and warn users about safety concerns. Did the app that connected Todd and Pascal have these protections? Were users warned about meeting strangers? Was Pascal's profile flagged for any concerning behavior or history? We don't know, because the app hasn't been held accountable for its role in Todd's death. Corporate responsibility ends where profit margins begin, and Todd Morgan's life wasn't worth threatening a tech company's business model. The failure of Todd Morgan's Hudson neighborhood to respond to obvious warning signs reveals something deeply troubling about modern American communities. We've created suburbs that prioritize privacy over connection, individual comfort over collective security, and plausible deniability over moral responsibility. Multiple neighbors heard gunshots on the morning of April 19th. In interviews with police, they described sounds that were clearly gunfire, but explained them away as construction noise, firecrackers, or car backfires. This wasn't ignorance, it was willful denial. Hudson, Ohio isn't inner-city Detroit or South Chicago. It's a quiet, affluent suburb where gunshots are virtually unknown. When multiple neighbors hear what sounds like gunfire in quick succession, the appropriate response isn't to rationalize the noise away, it's to call police immediately. But that would require getting involved. That would mean potentially having to give statements, talk to detectives, maybe even testify in court. It would mean acknowledging that violence had invaded their safe suburban sanctuary and that they had a responsibility to respond to it. Multiple houses in Todd's neighborhood had Ring cameras and similar security systems. These devices recorded Terayona Paschal's arrival, her behavior around Todd's house, and her hurried departure carrying items that didn't belong to her. But Ring cameras don't just record, they're designed to alert homeowners to unusual activity. In real time, the footage that eventually helped convict Paschal was available to neighbors as it was happening. They could have seen a suspicious woman entering and leaving their neighbor's house with obvious urgency. They chose not to act on what they saw. This isn't a technology failure. It's a moral failure. We've created communities where people are more concerned with capturing crime on camera than preventing it, more interested in having evidence for insurance claims than protecting their neighbors' lives. Perhaps most tragically, Todd Morgan's death revealed how isolated he had become in his own neighborhood. Despite living in Hudson for years, despite being a respected professor and devoted father, no one knew him well enough to check on him when he didn't appear for his usual routines. This isn't entirely the community's fault. Todd was described as reserved and private, but it reflects a broader breakdown in the social connections that once made neighborhoods actual communities rather than collections of individual houses. If Todd had been better integrated into his community, if neighbors had known his schedule and habits, if there had been informal networks of mutual support and awareness, his absence might have been noticed earlier. The welfare check might have happened sooner. His life might have been saved. When Sandy Morgan stood in the Summit County Courthouse on the day of Terayona Paschal's sentencing, she wasn't just a grieving mother seeking closure. She was the embodiment of systemic failure, the human cost, of institutional negligence, the living reminder of what happens when society fails to protect its most vulnerable members. "Only God, Todd, and you know the truth of what happened on April 19th, she said, her voice steady, but her hands shaking as she held photographs of her murdered son. "All I know is he was brutally murdered by you, and he basically died for nothing." The phrase "for nothing" cuts deeper than any legal argument or policy critique. Todd Morgan didn't die in service of a cause, protecting someone else, or making a heroic sacrifice. He died because he wanted companionship. He died because he trusted a system designed to facilitate human connection. He died because every institution that should have protected him, police, technology companies, community networks, failed him when he needed them most. "You didn't even know him," Sandy continued, addressing Pascal directly. "Your actions to take my son's life changed my life forever. It's changed all of our lives. Even more so, you took a father from two beautiful children. They were his world, and he was theirs." But Sandy's rage wasn't directed only at her son's killer. In interviews after the sentencing, she expressed fury at the system that allowed Todd's murder to happen. "The police had a chance to save my son," she told reporters. "They got a 911 call from her phone and did nothing. Nothing. They left a voicemail and went back to their coffee." Her anger is justified. More than justified. It's a moral imperative that should shame every official who played a role in the cascade of failures that killed her son. Todd Morgan's children, a 4-year-old daughter and older child, have become orphans not through natural tragedy or unavoidable circumstances, but through preventable institutional failure. They will grow up knowing that their father didn't have to die, that systems existed to protect him, that people were paid to keep him safe, and all of those systems failed. The 4-year-old who waited at school for a father who would never come will carry that trauma for the rest of her life. Every time she sees a police car, every time she hears about 911 calls, every time someone promises that help is coming, she'll remember the day help didn't come for her daddy. Child psychologists who work with trauma survivors describe this as systemic betrayal trauma, the psychological damage caused not just by the original traumatic event, but by the failure of institutions that should have prevented it. It's a form of PTSD that carries additional layers of helplessness and distrust, because it teaches children that the adult world cannot be relied upon to keep them safe. Todd's children will need therapy, support, and years of healing to process not just their father's death, but the circumstances that made it preventable. They'll grow up in a world where they know that 911 calls can go unanswered, where police protocols can prioritize paperwork over human life, where communities can watch violence happen and choose not to act. That's the real cost of Todd Morgan's death. Not just the loss of one good man, but the loss of innocence and trust in an entire generation of children who now know that the systems meant to protect them can't be trusted. Hudson, Ohio, prided itself on being a safe community. Low crime rates, good schools, quiet neighborhoods, all the markers of suburban success that attract families seeking stability and security. Todd Morgan's murder shattered that illusion in ways that statistics can't capture. Neighbors who heard gunshots and did nothing now live with the knowledge that their inaction contributed to a preventable death. Ring camera owners who recorded suspicious activity but didn't report it must confront their role in the tragedy. Parents who trusted their community to keep their families safe now question every assumption about suburban security. The Hudson Police Department's failure to respond appropriately to the 911 hang-up call has created a crisis of confidence that extends far beyond Todd's case. If police won't investigate mysterious emergency calls in broad daylight, what other warning signs are they ignoring? If protocols prioritize bureaucracy over human life, what happens when the next crisis emerges? Local social media groups, once focused on school board meetings and neighborhood events, are now filled with angry discussions about police accountability and community responsibility. Residents are demanding answers, policy changes, and accountability measures that should have been in place long before Todd Morgan died. But anger isn't enough. Outrage isn't enough. The community that failed Todd Morgan now faces a choice: learn from their failures and implement real changes, or continue living with the comfortable delusion that tragedy won't strike again. When details of Todd Morgan's case began spreading on social media, the public response was swift and furious. The story contained all the elements that make modern audiences see red: institutional failure, preventable death, and officials who refuse to take responsibility for their mistakes. "How does a 911 call just get ignored?" demanded one viral Twitter post that accumulated thousands of retweets. This man deserved better. His kids deserved better. The police had one job, and they failed. Another post captured the broader implications. Todd Morgan's death isn't just about one police department. It's about every 911 call that gets dismissed, every warning sign that gets ignored, every time the system fails people who need help. This could be any of us. Facebook groups dedicated to police accountability and criminal justice reform seized on Todd's case as evidence of systemic problems that extend far beyond Hudson, Ohio. His story became a rallying cry for people frustrated with institutional failures, unaccountable officials, and systems that prioritize convenience over human life. The viral spread of Todd's story served multiple purposes. It brought national attention to local failures, it put pressure on officials to explain their actions, and it connected his death to broader patterns of systemic breakdown that affect communities nationwide. But viral outrage has a short attention span. The challenge now is converting temporary anger into sustained pressure for meaningful change, not just in Hudson, but in communities across the country where similar failures are waiting to happen. Todd Morgan's death represents something far more terrifying than random violence or criminal behavior. It represents the breakdown of the social contract we all depend on, the assumption that systems exist to protect us, that institutions will respond when we need help, that communities will act when they witness danger. Every person reading this story depends on the same systems that failed Todd Morgan. We all carry phones that can dial 911. We all trust that emergency calls will be answered and investigated. We all live in communities where neighbors are supposed to look out for each other. We all use technology platforms that promise to facilitate safe connections with other people. Todd's death proves that none of these assumptions are reliable. When you call 911, will police respond appropriately? When you use a dating app, are you protected from dangerous users? When you're in trouble, will your neighbors act to help you? When warning signs appear, will anyone in authority pay attention? Todd Morgan thought the answers to these questions were yes. He was wrong, and it killed him. Todd Morgan's case is part of a growing pattern of violence connected to online dating platforms. Dating apps have revolutionized how people meet and form relationships, but they've also created new opportunities for predators, stalkers, and violent criminals to access victims. The platforms make billions of dollars facilitating connections between strangers, but they invest minimal resources in safety measures, background checks, or warning systems. They prioritize user engagement over user safety, algorithmic matching over human security, profit margins over human life. Think about the asymmetry. Dating apps know everything about their users: location data, communication patterns, behavioral preferences, social connections. They have the technological capability to identify potentially dangerous users, flag suspicious behavior, and warn people about safety risks. But implementing comprehensive safety measures would be expensive. It would slow down the matching process. It might reduce user engagement. It could impact the bottom line, so they don't do it. and people like Todd Morgan die as a result. Every person who uses online dating is vulnerable to the same systemic failures that killed Todd. Every swipe, every match, every meetup carries risks that the platforms refuse to adequately address. We're all participating in a massive experiment in digital connection with inadequate safety measures and no accountability when things go wrong. The Hudson Police Department's failure to investigate the 911 hang-up call from Tereyona Pascal's phone exposes fundamental problems with how emergency response systems operate in modern America. The 911 system is supposed to be our final safety net, the last resort when everything else fails. Todd Morgan's case proves that the system itself can fail. Across the country, 911 dispatch centers are understaffed, underfunded, and operating with protocols that prioritize efficiency over effectiveness. Hang-up calls are common, and many departments have adopted policies that treat them as nuisances rather than potential emergencies. But those policies assume that people accidentally dial 911 at the same rate in all communities and circumstances. They don't account for the possibility that a hang-up call from an unfamiliar number in a low-crime area might indicate an actual emergency. They don't consider that someone might be trying to call for help but be unable to complete the call. The result is that genuine emergencies get dismissed as bureaucratic inconveniences. People in crisis get voicemails instead of assistance. And preventable tragedies like Todd Morgan's death become inevitable consequences of systemic indifference. How many other 911 calls have been dismissed with voicemails? How many other emergencies have been ignored because they didn't fit standard protocols? How many other Todd Morgans have died while police departments followed procedures that prioritize convenience over human life? The failure of Todd Morgan's neighbors to respond to obvious warning signs reflects a broader breakdown in community cohesion that has made all of us less safe. We've created suburban environments that prioritize privacy over connection, individual comfort over collective security, plausible deniability over moral responsibility. The result is communities full of people who don't know each other, don't look out for each other, and don't feel responsible for each other's safety. When something goes wrong, everyone assumes someone else will handle it. When warning signs appear, everyone finds reasons to look the other way. This isn't just a suburban problem. It's a national crisis of social connection that leaves everyone more vulnerable to crime, violence, and tragedy. We've built communities where people can be murdered in broad daylight, while neighbors who could help choose to mind their own business. The technology that was supposed to make us safer, ring cameras, security systems, neighborhood apps, has instead created a surveillance culture where people are more interested in recording crime than preventing it. We're all watching, but no one is acting. Todd Morgan died in a community full of people who had the tools and opportunity to save him. They just chose not to use them. Perhaps the most infuriating aspect of Todd Morgan's case is the complete absence of accountability for the failures that killed him. The Hudson Police Department followed their protocols. The dating app operated within legal boundaries. The neighbors weren't legally required to act. The 911 system functioned as designed. Everyone did what they were supposed to do, according to the rules they were given, and a good man died as a result. This is what institutional failure looks like in modern America. Not dramatic corruption or obvious negligence, but the systematic prioritization of bureaucratic convenience over human life. It's policies that protect institutions rather than people, protocols that minimize liability rather than maximize safety, systems that serve themselves rather than the communities they're supposed to protect. When Todd Morgan died, no one was fired, No policies were changed, no officials were held accountable. The systems that failed him continue to operate exactly as they did before, which means they're ready to fail the next person who needs help. Todd Morgan's death matters only if it changes something, only if it forces improvements in the systems that failed him, only if it prevents the next preventable tragedy from happening to someone else's father, someone else's son, someone else's family. But change requires pressure. It requires public attention. It requires people to care enough about institutional failure to demand institutional reform. Share this story on every platform you use. Send it to friends, family, co-workers, and strangers. Make it impossible for officials to ignore what happened to Todd Morgan and why it happened. When you share it, ask the hard questions. Why isn't your local police department required to investigate? 911 hang-up calls? What safety measures does your favorite dating app actually provide? How well do you know your neighbors, and would they act if you were in danger? What would happen if you needed help and the system failed you the way it failed Todd? The Hudson Police Department's failure to investigate the 911 hang-up call from Terreona Pascal's phone isn't just a local problem, it's a symptom of nationwide issues with emergency response protocols and police accountability. Contact your local police department and ask about their policies for handling 911 hang-up calls. Demand that they explain how they would respond to a similar situation in your community. Push for policy changes that prioritize human safety over bureaucratic convenience. Support organizations working for police reform and accountability. Vote for local officials who prioritize public safety over law enforcement comfort. Attend city council meetings and ask hard questions about emergency response protocols. Most importantly, don't accept standard procedure as an excuse for institutional failure. Procedures can be changed, protocols can be improved, officials can be held accountable, but only if we demand it. Dating apps and social media platforms make billions of dollars facilitating connections between strangers, but they invest minimal resources in keeping users safe. They have the technological capability to implement comprehensive safety measures, but they choose not to because safety costs money and might reduce user engagement. Todd Morgan died because the dating app that connected him to his killer prioritized profit over user safety. How many more people have to die before we demand better? Support legislation that requires tech companies to implement meaningful safety measures. Boycott platforms that refuse to prioritize user safety. Demand transparency about how these companies protect users from dangerous individuals. Most importantly, understand that every time you use a dating app or social media platform, you're participating in a system that puts your safety second to corporate profits. Use these platforms carefully, with full knowledge of the risks they refuse to adequately address. Todd Morgan died in a neighborhood full of people who could have saved him if they had acted.